The following show is brought to you in part by support from Robbins, Kaplan, Miller, and Cerisi. We don't just practice law, we make history. Online at rkmc.com.
Hello and welcome. I have one of my very favorite guests back tonight. Dudley Riggs is with me. As most of you know, Dudley is an institution here in the Midwest. He is the founder of the Brave New Workshop, the ETC Theater. He is an author. He is probably the father of many comedians who have come out of the Midwest and are graduates of Second City, some of them out in Hollywood, many of them. One of our senators, Al Franken, one of them. So it's wonderful to have you back.
Thank you.
I told Dudley that in this interview, I would like to focus on your circus days.
Oh.
And he has a whole big chapter of your life, really, that ties into being part of a circus, part of a vaudeville act. And so let's start way back. I just learned that when you were an infant, you actually were in a circus act.
Oh, yes. Yes, shortage of babysitters on the circus. And so my parents decided that they could keep an eye on me if they put me in the show. And so as an infant, they managed to put me into the production, and so I was given a ride around the Hippodrome track in a wonderful sleigh that was pulled by a polar bear, and they using circus hype as they do. It was called I was the Polar Prince from the North Pole with the polar bear pulling.
And so the Polar Prince.
Yeah.
And how old were you at this time? I mean, you were just a few months.
I was still in diapers, and but during the season, when the weather got very hot, the polar bear had difficulty dealing with the weather, and so that made it a little bit more exciting. But and I remember nothing of that because it was before I started remembering.
So far back. But both your parents were circus performers.
The circus performers and vaudeville performers.
Tell us about them, Dudley.
Well, my parents met while they were each on touring in vaudeville. My mother was a magician's assistant for the great Cardini, and my father was doing an acrobatic act with his brothers.
Brothers, how many brothers?
Well, there were 3 Riggs brothers, but they also added my grandfather, so that was the 4th Riggs brothers. And over the years, the Riggs brothers' name kept going no matter how many brothers there were at the time, and my father and I were the Riggs brothers for a while. So
it's just a really long-standing family tradition.
It's
with your family.
4 generations.
4 generations.
Before I came, so.
Really, Dudley. So going back to Europe somewhere?
My father's family came from England and from British music hall primarily, although they were involved. Grandfather and great-grandfather was involved in music hall, and then also as an equestrian in the circus, and he had come from the British cavalry, and so it was natural for him to do a horse act, as it were.
Now, this was your grandfather.
Yeah,
your grandfather.
My great-grandfather was I guess great-great-grandfather would have been in in Victoria's army as a cavalry person.
So in the circus, what kind of equestrian act was he part of?
Well, what's referred to as dressage, it's sort of precision, marching. Particularly, it's best known for the Vienna horse acts
Yes, I think we
that
can
use
all
this.
picture that.
But he, when the family immigrated to the United States, they were doing vaudeville, and that's where he met my mother.
And you were born in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Yes.
We have a photo here that I want to show you of his folks. It's just an amazing photo. On the back of it, it says it's from 1928, but we'll get a close-up here. You told me it was a bit cloudy because it got muddy when it was in a tornado, the photo?
One of my adventures is that twice in my life, everything we owned has been blown away by a tornado. And it happens that this photo was blown away when our living quarters blew away. And we recovered it out of a mud puddle, and it was covered with mud. And I see I think we wiped that off, and years later we can still see that there was.
Aren't you glad you rescued it?
But that was one of the few things that survived the storm, and so my family had the situation of essentially being homeless, but at the same time traveling with the circus. So,
well, both your folks were performers in vaudeville, as you explained, in the winter time,
right,
and then circus performers in the summer.
Right. In order to have a year-round employment, our tendency has been to perform in vaudeville when the circus goes in as the weather turns, and many of the acts were the same, but we also always had to have a crossover.
Some of the vaudeville acts were just transferred to the circus ring.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And and the tradition then was to vaudeville acts generally didn't change much, and the idea was that you would polish your act but not change it. And of course, the thought at the time was that if you had 12 good minutes, you could work for a lifetime. And there were 2,000 vaudeville theaters in the country, so that seemed realistic. But of course, with television, vaudeville theaters went away.
Right, but we still have some vaudeville theaters here in the Twin Cities, don't we?
Yes.
What were a couple of the big ones that are still, that people would know?
Well, the Orpheum, of course, was the biggest vaudeville theater between Chicago and the West Coast.
Oh, was it? I didn't know that.
So very large for vaud houses, so 2,800 seats, I believe, at that time.
Well, that's huge.
And so, we played there, and we played. We also played in the theater now known as the Schubert, which we knew when it was called the Alvin Theater, and
right.
A few years later. But
so you toured the whole U.S. with your family?
Largely, yes.
Mostly. And you told me you also went to Europe and South America, correct?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So you must have been a very successful family act.
Well, I guess we always thought we were struggling.
Oh,
but,
did you?
But I think that's just the nature of show business, is that you are always struggling.
And I suppose you aren't guaranteed that they're going to ask you back year after year. Is that?
There's always that, but of course the question of, even now modern day, a movie star today enters into a film, and you have to know it's an ephemeral. This may be the only film
Right,
it may
right.
be the
Same
last
kind of
film.
feeling then.
There's always that sense, and I think show people, and certainly actors have to move from, keep moving from job to job. You go where the work is when you're
So
in show
similar
business.
kind of feel. And in terms of the circus periods, I'm assuming from what I've heard you say before that these were big top circuses.
Yes, under
Camps.
canvas.
Raised every few days in a different town.
Well, my typical, my best memory of it is a new town every day.
Oh, every day, Dudley.
And the circuses that I toured with, except certainly there were New York engagements that would run longer, and Chicago, Boston. But once you leave the East Coast,
So the smaller,
then almost every day would be a new town, and so typical circus contract calls for 7 days, 13 performances, which means matinee and evening every day except Sunday. And then Sunday, you do a matinee, and then you had your weekend. And the weekend was, of course, from 5 o'clock on
so a pretty
Sunday
exhausting
afternoon
schedule.
until 5 a.m. on Monday, at which point you expect to be in the next town.
So traveling on the move. As a young person, a little boy, what was the part that you loved about this life? And then what did you really dislike?
Well, I think the main the circuses, many of the large circuses historically traveled by rail, but most of the circuses in the United States were motorized, and so circus, what we always referred to as mud shows, that traveled on the public road and frequently ended up on muddy lots, but one-night stands are quite challenging, and in a way they're fun because every day you're in a new town, and you don't always even know which town you're in, and so it's a way to see the country.
So that'd be a real positive.
Sure.
What was the part you didn't like as a young boy?
Oh, I think the main difficulty is for me and for show people generally is that you are all, since you are a gypsy or you are an itinerant person passing through the community.
So sense of place was kind of missing.
Well, then also your acceptance is, show people were always suspect, and
They were so thought of as being a little on the wild side.
well, no, I think more the question of the other. We are the arriving,
The outsiders.
and essentially you're exploiting that. You come to town, the uniqueness of the performer is part of the attraction, but at the same time, they really aren't encouraging you to stay.
So you didn't
Right.
feel a sense of belonging. We have to go back and have you explain. You were the Polar Prince as a little tiny
Sure.
baby. Then at age 5, you started doing something else.
Oh, in vaudeville, yes.
And what was that?
Well, I became a song and dance performer in vaudeville
At 5?
for a couple of seasons. I did that, and
Kind of a la Shirley Temple, or what? How would you compare?
Well,
Thinking
this was in the period when Shirley Temple was certainly in fashion, and I think we rather joked about it. People would say, "Oh, you put a child in the act, so it's a sympathy act," but put the little kid there, make the kid work. But it had some attraction, and I did rather well with it for a couple of seasons. And
were you a solo performer as a little
yes,
5-year-old?
and then and then of course when after a while I sort of lost my cutes, as I've said, and I was no longer.
You're still cute.
Yeah, and so the bookings didn't stop coming, and fortunately
We're out of that.
fortunately that was the beginning of the World's Fair, and so we went off to something else. But they made the transition, particularly at that time, back to the circus.
So your folks were always thinking and always figuring out how to probably use the family members in different acts, right?
Yeah.
And then what else did you do in terms, I know a little bit about your work with your father as a trapeze artist.
Yes.
But in between there were some things too, I bet.
Yes. Well, most, as I said, vaudeville performers would tend to set an act and continue it. We were never inclined to do that. We kept developing
material.
other talents, if you will, and it was kind of mostly a matter of what can we do that has some appeal. What can we sell, essentially, and so we did flying trapeze, and we did aerial perch and various times.
So was this with the Ringling Brothers, Barnum Bailey, when you were the flying trapeze
Primarily,
act?
this was Daly Brothers Circus at that particular
The
point.
Bailey Brothers,
But my family had the Riggs Brothers Circus, which ran for a number of years, and actually it managed to stay out on the road continuously for a few years, which was sort of unheard of at that time.
And it was not a small circus. I read that your father, the owner, had, was it 125 vehicles when you'd pull into town?
Yes.
So, I mean, that's a big circus, isn't it?
Yeah, and the circus got bigger all the time because that year the Ringling Show closed early. 1937, Ringling Show closed closed at an early time, and so some of the acts from there came over and joined the show. And then there were a number of performers who, particularly animal acts, who were in trouble because they need to feed the animals. And so many of those acts joined our show, and even though that we couldn't pay their large salaries, we were keeping
The Ringling Brothers
we were keeping them intact, and so people came over for stock feed and cookhouse, as they said, and it allowed some of those acts to survive the Depression.
Oh, that's so interesting, Dudley. I'm just so curious how you personally came to become an aerialist. I mean, this just sounds like a daunting task.
Well, my parents were well established as aerial performers before I came along, and so we had some family momentum going, and as my father put me into the act, and originally it was kind of to keep an eye on me when I was little, but eventually it became a matter of joining the act and learning the ropes, learning to do the work. And
Did you train with the net?
oh yes, yes. And
Your mother wasn't having a heart attack every time you went up there?
well, no, my parents worked a double trapeze at over the center ring, and when I was 9, thereabouts, I stood the at, so-called. I would stand under the at, directly under the at, and watch their performance. And there's a long tradition of this in circus families, where part of the family will be present just in case someone falls.
And what would you have done, I mean, as a 9-year-old?
Well, obviously you can't catch a falling body.
No,
But the legend has
it's
it
sort of
that if you reach out and slap the falling person, that will change the result of their fall. And
so you must have had a great sense of responsibility as a little
yeah.
9-year-old.
Well, particularly interesting if my parents were not exactly getting along, that always created an extra little tension. But this that was another kind of a sympathy act idea, I think, in a way. You put the child
Underneath the
yeah,
parents.
but the
How old were you when you first then actually did the aerial work
I
with
was
your
I was
dad?
working. Starting at around 10, I started flying, and I continued to do that until to my early 20s, and so I had a pretty good run as a flyer, and
Did you like it, Dudley?
oh yes,
You did.
no, there's
Was
not,
there a thrill every time?
there's nothing like the exhilaration that comes from being airborne, essentially,
I can imagine.
and learning the power of gravity and learning the power of
And what your body can do.
sure.
Oh,
And
it
so
just,
it's a question of always starting the movement by saying, "Hey, watch this, have fun," and so it was fun.
and you had to mentally be, I'm thinking, so positive to believe that the other person was going to catch you, that you would catch the other person if it was reversed.
Yes. Well, there's all clearly that everyone has to be attentive, has to tend to work, but the having had an occasion where I missed that and learned a big lesson from it. But
Well, yeah, just in a nutshell, you had a terrible accident, and that was out in Boston,
yeah.
and that's really what ultimately got you back here to Minneapolis, isn't it?
Well, I think I kept cycling back through Minneapolis because I would come here for the Shrine Show, and I discovered that if I got hired for the Shrine Circus, I could come here and would be in town just right to go to winter quarter at the U. And
So you started doing that.
yeah, so I was sort of going through college winter quarter at a time. So, but
Well, that's a whole nother interview then. And I want to have you back and talk more about what we're talking about tonight and then sort of transition into the next chapter. But you brought a couple excerpts from a book you're writing, and it's really about his circus days. So I'm excited. I'm so pleased you're writing that. Would you read, we have only a few minutes left.
Sure.
Would you read one of the sections for us? And this is in manuscript form yet, so it's not, the book isn't done, but which one would you choose to read?
This is sort of first person self-talk, actually, and it deals with flying
good.
and so but it's trying to explain to another flyer. I rosin my hands after I'm up the ladder. That way none is lost in the climb. Besides, the ritual of powdering my hands builds audience anticipation. We buy a solid rosin block at the music store. Deep amber intended for the bows of cellos and violins is crushed and placed in a clean white sock, and that becomes our rosin bag. As I prepare to fly, I focus on all the little details, almost unaware of the big picture. Then I release my feet and fly. Then comes the rush, the aliveness, the arousal, the joy. Aerial acrobatics do not feel the way they appear. I do not see myself at this moment as a figure fluidly passing from trapeze and flying into the hands of another man swinging in the air. The fly bar is heavy, a solid rod of steel, and when you take the bar, it has energy, and you have to be ready to go. It could pull you right off the pedestal if you're off of balance. When the catcher wraps his legs into a Dutch lock, I know it's time. The catcher swings out and back, 2 swings to complete the geometry of my own longer arc. When he's at the near end of his swing, I know it's showtime. I go down the hill of space and meet him as he comes up to take my hands.
Down the hill of space, I love that. Well, that's wonderfully descriptive. So you're going to have lots and lots of anecdotes, obviously, in this new book. Well, we just have a minute and a half or something left. Would you talk about just briefly the accident in just a few seconds that
Oh, yeah.
it was a slip of the hand or?
Oh, no, it's a problem of having worked with a new catcher who I didn't know well and who
Wasn't your dad?
yeah, no, and so I had always thought that he was out of sync, but it could have been that I was. But in any event, he had missed his morning drink, and so was a little shaky and not up to speed. And so the upshot was that I came down and he came down, and we both crashed. And as someone said, I never knew he drank until I saw him sober. And
So you had multiple breaks and.
yeah.
Oh, Dudley. Well, thank you so much. We're out of time. I have found this fascinating, as I'm sure you have too. I'd love to invite you to come back and we'll talk more. Thank you for being with us. I've been talking to Dudley Riggs, our wonderful treasure, founder of Brave New Workshop, and a good friend. So it's been great to see you.
Thank you. You're very kind.